Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for the UT Family Business Center webinar. Today we are going to talk about reopening the workplace. So I think today is happy reopening day, at least retail. I saw through my feed this morning that a lot of the stores and the malls and everyone's opening back up. So what we're doing today, so if you haven't participated in any of our webinars, what we do is we are just trying to be responsive to our members. Whatever topics are important or on their mind at the time, we have gone out and tried to find experts to address it, and we heard a lot of feedback that there was a lot of questions and uncertainty around reopening in terms of social distancing or employees. You know, what if your employees don't want to come back? Just a lot of questions on how to deal with that. So we've assembled a team, or an employee benefits. So we've assembled a team of Rebecca Schoaf with Shumaker, Loop, and Kendrick, Madison Bezdechek with Hylant, and Michelle Willard with Hylant. Our format going forward is I will give each of these women a few minutes and this is our first all-women panel that we've had, so we're really excited about this. But we'll give each of these women a few minutes to kind of talk to you about what they've been hearing from their clients, you know, how their interpretations of some things are, and then we will open it up for questions. So if you haven't used Zoom before, if you scroll or hover down to the bottom of your screen, there's a chat box down there. If you click on that, your chat should appear at the right. You might have to move up to the right-hand corner to toggle with your speaker view to get it to how you want it to look. But if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box. I will monitor and watch those, and I will ask on your behalf. If it's something in depth and you want to do some dialogue back and forth with some of the presenters, you can either just let me know in the chat box, or if you hover down again and click on Manage Participants, you'll see all the participants in the right-hand corner. Your name should be up to the top, up near the top, and there's a Raise My Hand button that you can click on, and then I'll know to call on you to ask your question. Or if I see that the question's a little bit in depth, I might watch your chat box, because I might message you directly and say, I'm going to have you go ahead and unmic and ask that question. So that's how we will go moving forward. We will start with Rebecca, and I'll go ahead and give you the floor. Thank you. You might need to unmute yourself.
Okay, hi everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Well, thank you all for participating here today. My name is Rebecca Schoaf. I'm a partner at Shumaker, Loop, and I've been there since 2008. Before we start the presentation, I just want to emphasize that this is for informational purposes. It's not intended to be relied upon as legal advice. I would note that even as we sit here today and participate in the Zoom call, guidance is continually evolving. And so it's really critical that each of you stay up to date on the guidance and certainly consult legal counsel as questions do arise. If you're participating today, that means you guys have questions about reopening and or increasing capacity within the workplace in a safe manner. If you do have questions, I will tell you, you are not alone. We have been bombarded with a lot of employer questions about how do I start operating again? What happens if my employees express concerns or fears about coming into the workplace? And so we are in unprecedented times. No one had any type of playbook for employers as to how to deal with this pandemic. So moving forward, from my perspective, the best thing that each of you can do as owners and managers is first educate yourself, which I think everyone participating here is obviously doing. Number two, be prepared, have contingency plans in order, and then transparent communication with employees. And so I'm going to talk about some of these aspects here today. I did prepare a PowerPoint slide that I'm going to do a share screen, and we'll go through a few questions and topic points that I've filtered. Can everyone see the screen? Yes, great. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start the slideshow. If after this presentation you have any questions or want to contact me directly, my contact information is here on the first slide. So just one moment. I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so great point to start with respect to all of our business owners is education and resources. And on this first slide here, I've provided you with some links to some fantastic websites that I strongly, strongly encourage each and every one of you to visit if you haven't already. The first one that I've highlighted is the CDC website. It's important. If you haven't gone to this website, I suggest that you do. I also recommend that you designate either yourself or a team of employees who are going to be responsible at the workplace for health and safety compliance. Additionally, many of our employers operate in different states, and so it's important as well to make sure that you've reviewed all applicable governor and public health orders for the states that your companies are operating in. Another key website that I would suggest you visit is the DOL website discussing the Families First Coronavirus Act. And this was an act that was put into place about a month or so ago. I'm fielding a lot of questions about this regarding employers coming back into the workforce. These are employers maybe who have stopped operations for a little bit and are now planning to go back. What some of these employers do not know is that they may fall within the Families First Coronavirus Act and may need to designate certain leave time to eligible employees. There is a very comprehensive fact sheet on the DOL website that you can review. This fact sheet answers questions about what kind of documentation you may need to require from employees who are requesting either sick leave or expanded FMLA leave, and that fall within the Families First Act. Additionally, something else that I want to highlight is that for employers, they're required to also put a posting up, and that posting can also be found on the pandemic website. So those are some things that I find that some employers who are returning to the workforce have not necessarily reviewed that in depth, and so it's something you're going to want to do. Additionally, the EEOC has issued guidance on pandemic preparedness. I've attached that link as well, and that provides really in-depth guidance about accommodation requests. It also provides guidance as to new employee onboarding in the pandemic era, and so that's another website that I'm encouraging employers to also visit. And then lastly, we have the OSHA website, and there's some really good publications there on OSHA. And OSHA has provided some good guidance on preparing employers for coming back into the workforce. So let's talk about just reintroducing employees to the workforce. First and foremost, before anyone starts back up to operation, it's fundamentally important that you have safety and health protocols in place. Employers are enforcing self-temperature checks before employees are reporting to work. Many employers that we're working for are requiring self-checks at home. Some other employers are also themselves handling temperature checks. If you are doing temperature checks at the facility, number one, it would be encouraged that you do that before any employee enters the facility. Why is that? Well, once the employee enters a facility, if they have then a fever or have been tested positive or later tested positive for corona, they've now spread that into the facility. And so employers who are themselves doing the temperature checks are making sure that if they do that, they're doing it before the employee enters into the building. Additionally, employers need to be very cognizant of employee privacy requirements, making sure that they're keeping this temperature information confidential, that they're not disclosing it to other coworkers. And so privacy considerations is something else that you want to be very mindful of. And we'll get into that a little bit further when we talk about employees testing positive for COVID in the workplace. Additionally, common sense, but make sure your employees who are sick, who have a fever, who are displaying any respiratory symptoms, if they come to you and say, I'm not feeling well, make sure that they are going home and not staying within the workforce. We also want to strictly enforce social distancing requirements. What we're seeing some employers do is set up different markers within the workplace, making sure that they don't have groups of people congregating on break times. We've seen a lot of employee complaints related to the fact that, 25 people were in a small break room at the same time. And so you're going to want to make sure that you're monitoring any breaks. You may have to shift some breaks to limit the amount of people who are in the same area, and to make sure that you're enforcing social distancing requirements. Establish, obviously, cleaning and disinfectant schedule. If you don't already have an outside cleaning company that comes in, you may want to be something that you want to consider. Making sure that you have a sufficient supply of sanitizers and establishing hand washing stations. Also encourage telework as you are able to do so within your business. Now, obviously, there are certain types of businesses that are going to be more accommodating for telework. Manufacturing, for example, it's going to be difficult to have certain employees telework. But if you are able to encourage teleworking, that's something that you should consider, and maybe consider doing a gradual reintroduction into the workforce versus having everyone come in all at one time. Maybe consider having 25% of the workforce come in, at a certain point, modifying days that people come in, and allowing telework to continue at least until a point where we feel more comfortable about where we are with the current health situation. You also want to make sure you have appropriate PPE available for employee use. One thing I want to highlight here is the issue of mask. And so making sure that you are encouraging employees to wear masks. If you are mandating mask usage, you need to be cognizant of OSHA requirements, and they are strict. And so you want to make sure that those mask or respirators are OSHA compliant if you're doing a mandated mask use. Again, OSHA is going to be a great resource regarding PPE, but making sure that you're addressing that before you reopen into the workforce. I've seen a lot of employers who are actually holding off on reopening because they said we just don't have the sanitation yet in order, or the PPE necessary to at least start operations from day one. Talk about making various modifications to the workplace. I already mentioned the gradual reintroduction of the workforce. We've had employers consider shift changes, no common gatherings. We've had employee complaints where the employer has had a group meeting with everyone at the facility to talk about health and safety measures. That's not something that you are going to want to do. You want to make sure that you are dividing people up. If you need to do small groups, which are going to be discouraged, that there's certainly less than 10 people within those gatherings and everyone's maintaining social distancing requirements. You're going to want to look at your workspaces and equipment. Do you need to move any workspaces so that you're ensuring employees are 6 feet apart? And making sure that you look also at your equipment requirements so that you don't have employees sharing equipment, or at least limiting the amount of equipment that's being shared. Consider pre-screening, obviously, visitors at the facility. Visitors who come in may want to enter into a health questionnaire. I mean, most of the employers, I can't think of a single employer that's not having visitors fill out some type of questionnaire confirming that that person hasn't been exposed, doesn't have any temperature, fever, other symptoms that could potentially harm the employees in the workforce. Business critical travel only, so that we are not having people go out into the field or go out on client visits if in fact they can do those virtually. Also, employee education is key. We have a lot of employers who are creating employee booklets or play booklets on how to best address sanitation and best practices that they should be utilizing when coming back to the work. And also consider contingency operation plans. What happens if you have someone test positive? How are you going to address that? And so making sure that you've thought through all of those potential fact scenarios so you're not finding yourself in a bind in the event that you have an unexpected outbreak or an unexpected positive case. So a question that I've gotten multiple calls on: can an employee refuse to return to work? And the answer is really, it depends. There are a lot of considerations that go into whether or not an employee can actually refuse to return to work. For example, there may be employee protections under OSHA, NLRA, under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Most of the questions that I'm fielding are employees who have underlying medical conditions and who say, because of my medical condition, I don't want to return to work. And so with respect to those employees, you're going to have to do and be ADA compliant and making sure that you're engaging in the interactive process and that you provide reasonable accommodations for those employees. And the best thing to do is also maintain flexibility with respect to those employees as well. We also want employers to be mindful and remember that these employees who are refusing to come back to work or who at least express some concern about returning back to work may also be entitled to other leave protections. So for example, I'm an employee, I've been off work, I've been called back to work, but now I can't because I'm the only one who's there to care for my children. Well, that employee would be potentially eligible under the Families First Act for leave time. And so you want to be careful about those considerations. There are certain circumstances, however, where an employee's refusal to work may not fall into one of these categories, and it may be something that could be a terminable offense. But again, it's very, very, very fact specific. And so you want to make sure that you consult with counsel if you have any questions regarding that. But again, one of the things that we're seeing, most of our questions are employees who say, I have an underlying medical condition and here's a doctor's note that I don't want to return to the office because I'm concerned, or I don't want to return to my position because of my medical condition. And then you'll have to engage in the ADA interactive process. So if an employee refuses to return to work, can that impact unemployment? It can. Again, it depends on the circumstance. But if let's assume I'm a completely healthy individual, I don't fall within the Families First Act, and I just really just don't want to come to the office. I'm getting more on unemployment. And that may be true. And so you may have those situations where someone just says, you know what, I don't want to return. I just want to stay on unemployment. I'm healthy, and that's my only reason that for not returning is because I want to continue receiving my enhanced unemployment check. Well, under that circumstance, the employee's unemployment would be impacted because the employee is choosing not to return to work when work is available. And so it would most likely impact the claim. Now, why am I using the words most likely? Well, because ultimately that determination is within the state. And so that's something that's outside the employer's control, and the state's going to make the determination on whether then to refuse continuing to provide unemployment. But under the fact scenario that I gave, healthy employee just refusing not to return to work, that would likely impact unemployment claims. So how do we, considerations for selecting employees for recall. So we just want to make sure as employers that when we look at bringing employees back to the workplace, particularly if we're doing it in a piecemeal fashion, that we're returning them in a non-discriminatory fashion. So probably the best example of this is you can't just say, okay, I'm going to return all of my young employees, right? Because the old employees are within this enhanced category where they could be more susceptible. Well, no, that's going to be impermissible. What you can do, of course, is ask for volunteers in making those decisions, but we want to be mindful of who we're bringing back, and the reason that we're bringing those individuals back are based on business considerations, and it's not disproportionately impacting a particular category of protected individuals. When we're rehiring employees who have been laid off or who have been furloughed or previously terminated, you want to make sure that you're looking at your onboarding documentation. I would suggest that you have them re-acknowledge the employee handbook, and it also is a good time to look at your current non-disclosure, your confidentiality agreements, and your non-competes, and having them either, number one, modifying those. If you've intended to modify them a while back, this might be a good time to modify them and have employees sign them. But certainly making sure that you're completing the necessary onboard documentation. The other thing you're want to do is consult with your benefits plan administrator to make sure that you are appropriately handling benefits and making sure that we don't need to go through the re-enrollment process. And if we do need to, that we're putting those documentation in front of the employees so that we can get them their benefits as soon as possible. In looking at potential updates to policies, employers should also consider about updating their applicable policies such as PTO and sick time and attendance policies. You got to be careful about that and consult with legal counsel because there are certain parameters on what you can modify, but certainly that's something you may want to look at, is the impact of your current PTO policies and moving forward, whether or not that's going to be difficult for your company as you start reintegrating back into the stream of commerce. So one question that we're getting a lot is what happens if you have an employee test positive for COVID? So I'm first going to redirect all of you back again to the CDC website. CDC website has a lot of information regarding this, and it's more specific than this particular slide. Obviously, you're going to need this person to self-quarantine. I also strongly recommend, and in fact it's required, you're going to have to communicate to the workforce. Now, and making sure that you're doing that transparently. It never makes sense to try to hide the ball. These employees are going to find out if you have a positive case, so it's best to be transparent. And in many cases, you have an obligation to notify employees, particularly if they have been potentially exposed. You have to maintain employee confidentiality, though, when you do that. So you cannot disclose the name of the employee who was tested positive. Instead, you should be more generic about it. An employee within your department tested positive for COVID. You're going to want to identify those individuals that came within close proximity, at least 6 feet for at least 10 minutes. And within the 40-hour period before the employee started developing the symptoms and required the self-quarantine. That's going to be one of the first things you're going to want to do so that those people are absolutely notified and can self-quarantine themselves. Hiring an outside cleaning company to fully disinfect the facility. Some companies are also opting just to completely shut down for some time period. It depends when the infection takes place. Making sure you contact your local health departments and state health departments so they can provide further guidance, and continuing to comply with CDC guidance. And CDC guidance is continually changing, so that's why if you do have a positive test, I want to strongly emphasize that you should visit the CDC website, and then also, which may have some updated guidance as well, but then also the health department, state department are great resources as well. So that's it for at least what I've had. Hopefully that's provided you guys with some helpful information, and more than willing to answer questions as we move forward.
Thank you, Rebecca. I have a few questions before we shift gears over into the benefit side. First one was, what is considered a fever? Is there a certain, who decides and what's considered a fever? Is it 99, 100, 101?
That's a great question. So under the CDC website, with respect to COVID, they usually look for symptoms that are 100.4 combined with some other symptoms. But the CDC also talks about anyone who's had a fever, and it doesn't put a parameter in the CDC guidance as to, it just says for more than 48 hours. So bottom line is, to me, if I'm an employer and I have an employee who's a 99, I'd opt on the safe side.
Thanks. And what if you have an employee who doesn't kind of fall under, they're a healthy employee, they've been working remotely, so they haven't been laid off, but they've been called back to work in the office, but they just don't want to. And they say, you know what, I've shown that I can work successfully remotely. What do the employers have any rights, or do you have any guidance or suggestions on how to handle that type of situation?
So yeah, that's a question that we've been getting a lot because, as you can imagine, these employees, many employees find it more convenient to work from home for various reasons. It really is going to be dependent, number one, on the employer and having that discussion. I mean, is this something that the employee can do long-term or no? I mean, maybe this is something, an administrative assistant, while yeah, she's been able to, or he has been able to virtually work, these last few weeks. Well, maybe as you're reintroducing people in the workforce, that's not going to be conducive because there needs to be more collaboration. So I am encouraging employers to have candid discussions with employees, including, in my opinion, I think a good mechanism is to say to the employee, okay, well, you don't want to come in over now. When do you think you're going to be at a spot where you are going to feel comfortable coming back to work? So put the onus back on the employee and see what that employee says.
Okay. Are there any discrimination issues if you have an instance where in a situation an employee says, hey, but this person gets to continue to work from home because they have little kids and they have someone they have to give care to, but I don't have kids, but I'm being effective, if not more effective working from home. Why does this person get to work from home, but I don't? Have you come across that at all?
You know, I personally have not fielded any of those questions myself, at least as of late. What I will say is anytime that you're treating different categories of employees differently, there's always a risk for potential claim. And so you have to look at it from a case-by-case basis. And so, what if you're allowing, for example, the young person with kids to work from home and not the old person in the same position? Well, that's going to be an issue. And so you do have to be careful in looking at how you're making those business decisions and making sure that you're treating categories of employees similarly. But there may be circumstances under which an employee within a certain department or with a certain job, maybe those circumstances dictate something differently.
Okay, thank you. And there was a question, if there is a positive case detected at their workplace, is it simply the employer's discretion as to when to reopen once they have completed all the bullet points on your last slide?
So that's a great question. Again, my bullet points are not fully summarizing all CDC guidance, so I'm going to emphasize that. So I don't want you just to take my slides and apply that. There's much more at depth that you're going to want to do. But after you've completed CDC recommendations and any other cleanings, then it is an employer's discretion about reopening and how long to stay closed. What I would emphasize to all of the employers is it's going to be on a case-by-case basis. Let me give you an example. Let's assume instead of one employee, you now have an outbreak. Okay, maybe you've just been notified that there are 7 employees who tested positive all within 1 week. Well, you're going to treat that scenario differently than only one positive test. I just had one of my clients where the employee notified them on Saturday. So fortunately, it was a Saturday. They were able to do all of their cleaning on that Sunday, and they chose to reopen then on Monday. Now, again, if that would have been something where the employer, maybe that happened midweek, I'm not sure that employer would have made that same decision.
Okay. And then in that instance, so if they're called back and the employee said, no, there was a positive case, I'm not comfortable coming back, is that where you would have that one-on-one conversation with them?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, you need to figure out why are they uncomfortable coming back? Are they themselves exhibiting symptoms? Were they around the employee? And that's why under the CDC, it talks about the requirement of notifying people within 6 feet of that impacted employee within that 48-hour period. I mean, those people, you're not going to want to return them to work because those people are potentially exposed as well. And so it's a lot of these questions, unfortunately, are dependent on a case-by-case scenario based on the specific facts.
Okay, thank you. We are going to kind of shift gears and talk about an employee benefit side of things. But of course, Michelle or Rebecca's staying online. If you have any questions, we can circle back and do more questions at the end as well. So feel free to use the chat. Now I am going to pass it off to Madison from Hylant. And I probably muted you, Madison, so you'll have to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
We're good.
All right, and can you see my screen?
We can.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. My name is Madison Bezdachek. I'm the Health Strategies Practice Leader at Hylant, and I'm joined by my colleague, Michelle. I'll let her introduce herself now.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right. So yes, I specialize in the employee benefits area at Hylant. So I've been there a little over 11 years. So I'm excited to have an opportunity to talk to you today a little bit more about some tools and resources at the end of this presentation.
Great, thanks, Michelle. And just a little bit more information about my role at Hylant. I help our health strategists across our Hylant footprint implement and develop wellness strategies for their employees. So specifically, we're going to kind of zero in on the employee experience today. Before we jump ahead, there's a disclaimer that this is a fluid situation and this isn't legal advice. All right, so kind of getting into the mindset of the employee, as Rebecca just shared all of that fantastic information, you might want to think about how you as a leader or your managers are going to be thinking about a lot with returning to work, right? With procedures and safety, and anxiety is going to be high. It's going to be high for your employees, for your managers, for everybody, right? And there's going to be a level of awareness that I think is going to be really important to consider for your employees. And so that's just kind of something to keep in mind. And it's going to be important to really take precautions to make sure that your employees feel heard, they feel safe, and they feel cared for in this time of uncertainty, stress, and new challenges. And I really think that as much anxiety as there was at the beginning of the pandemic, there may be even more returning to work, because although the pandemic is obviously outside of our control, what's also out of our control is everybody else's actions, and that gives people a lot of anxiety. You've probably heard that masks can people are very passionate about wearing them, not wearing them, their personal liberties. Someone coughing or sneezing, it can give someone extreme anxiety. So just something to kind of think about, we're going to need to be aware of to really support employees in their mental health and just overall in this returning to work process. But what I like too about this is that although we would have never wanted to be in this situation, this is really an opportunity as an employer to show employees that you really care about them, and to kind of show up in a way that is if it's done right and they feel cared for, it's going to pay dividends in the long run in respect and appreciation and loyalty, I really believe. And it's just a really unique situation where, no one's ever gone through a pandemic before. We're kind of all in the same space. No one knows any more information than the other. And so as a leader, it's an opportunity to build trust with your employees by being transparent, by showing vulnerability, by just admitting that you don't have all the answers, but you're doing everything that you can. It's a really rare opportunity that that can be kind of leveraged to build a positive workplace culture, which is cool. And I think a big part of this is going to be communication. Communication is going to be key in just keeping people in the loop. Frequent and transparent communication of your return to work plans. Like Rebecca was saying, the policy that's in place, what are the procedures going to be? Of course, making sure that it's fair for everybody. So make sure to keep them updated and communicate in a passionate way that's very authentic. When people don't know what's going on, they oftentimes fill in the blanks with negative things. They're oftentimes, especially when anxiety is high, they're kind of finishing the story for themselves not in a positive light. So make sure that you keep them updated and communicate with them frequently. The next thing to consider is to consider flexibility, not only from a legal standpoint, like Rebecca shared. I want to kind of shed light on another reason why you would want to consider flexibility and individuality in response to this crisis. I've heard the quote during this pandemic, and I love it, and it is, "We're all in the same storm, but a different boat." So we're not in the same boat, we're in the same storm, what's going on around us, but we're all in a different boat because we all have unique circumstances that we're dealing with, whether it's caring for loved ones, whether it's childcare issues, whether it's just extreme anxiety that was already high before the pandemic. And we all have different coping skills and resilience skills. So some people may be coping really well. They may still be growing and learning and becoming stronger from this. And others may be really, really, really struggling and everywhere in between. So it's really important, not only from a legal standpoint, but even just thinking from an employee experience and employer standpoint that, again, this is a time to really meet people where they're at, to show them that you care and to kind of work with them. You know what, like Rebecca said, what do you need? When would you be comfortable? And kind of empowering your managers that they have a huge opportunity to build trust and those relationships right now, because employees really need it. And so it's not only going to be good for the returning to work situation, but also think a year, 2 years down the road and how it's going to impact that employee's relationship with you as an employer and their overall work experience. And so I've already kind of mentioned it. I think a big key to this is your frontline managers. You know, managers are so important in general because they do impact a big part of any employee's work experience. And I really want to encourage you today that as an employer, you helping your employees realize that they have this opportunity to help their employees, I think is going to be huge. And I see a lot of times, especially when we talk about mental health, managers getting nervous about, you know, I'm not a counselor, I don't want to talk to this person, I'm not going to know what to say. So just encouraging them that they don't have to be a counselor. They don't have to have all the answers. They just have to lean in, empathize with that person, and then connect them to support. And so I'm going to talk in a second about a really great tool. But before I move on, just again as a reminder, you know, your managers are going to probably be thinking about other things. They're going to be thinking about getting the machines up and running, or, you know, keeping the things clean. So just, it's an opportunity to remind them that they also have an opportunity to really take care of their employees and remind them of the resources that you have available to them. So one thing I wanted to share with you all is what I consider the golden response for managers. I think this is a great tool to have in your toolkit. This is from a mental health expert named Medi Spees. She is phenomenal. She does suicide awareness, but also just general mental health and emotional well-being speaking. And this is her kind of golden response that she gives. So if you could give your employees anything during this time, it's even just sharing this response. And so this is when, you know, an employee does open up to you to say, thank you for opening up to me. You have my support. I also realize I may not be the best person to support you in something like this. Our EAP has professionals that can you can connect with confidentially at no cost. Would you like me to connect you? And even something as simple as that can be really helpful right now. I read somewhere that empathy is our strongest tool in our toolkit right now for really supporting employees in this time. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Michelle, who's going to talk about some of our resources that we have here at Hylant to support you as an employer and for your employees as well.
Thank you, Madison. Yes, we've heard a lot of great information and received a lot of great guidance today. So I wanted to take this opportunity just kind of in closing to let you know that the Hylant.com is a resource that you can view. We have a lot of updated blogs trying to keep up to date on all the different changes that are coming, as we've talked about really pretty rapidly. We also have a specific coronavirus resource center, which information is available there. And so as we've talked, returning to work, you know, what does that look like for you? So there's a lot to know, there's a lot to remember. there's a lot to put in place and document. So we also have some resources related to a preparedness checklist, just trying to keep you on task. And that checklist is information related to anywhere from employee behaviors to the PPE, to the safety and cleaning, to the employee communication piece. So we're hoping that that will support you if you need it, and just making sure kind of every day you're going through the information and checking it off and making sure that you're doing your best to be compliant. The HR Toolkit, I actually put a link in here so that when you do receive the presentation, you can go to. It's a pretty robust toolkit for the HR professionals that are looking at kind of a guide for them. We've talked a little bit about templates, and we've talked about there's not been a playbook in the past. So trying to create that and have some sort of tool for your human resources team and professionals. That really includes a lot of information about the CARES Act, the Families First Act that we've talked about today, the HIPAA, the compliance piece, and things of that nature. And in talking about return to work, so what is your action plan? Although we're following the same rules and the guidance, we're all in a different place related to our workplace. So, creating a customized action plan specific to you is really important. So, having that, again, kind of template of where do I even start? What is my action plan, and what are the things that I need to make sure are in place for the health and the safety of the organization and my employees, most importantly. And lastly, the health and well-being toolkit. Madison talked, a lot about the health and well-being of your employees, and even disseminating that information to their families at home. So some of the employees that are coming to work, are coming home to a group of family members that have been stay-at-home and have not gone anywhere else. So, how are they feeling? So making sure that we're also not, just communicating to the employees, but also giving them material and information and guidance when they get home, and sharing, that information with their spouse or loved ones. I would say, that toolkit also provides information about resources that the employees or families can use, including apps on their phone for mental health, also anything related to telehealth. That's become a big new way of getting care. So how do I access telehealth, and what does that mean, and what does that really look like for those employees and their families or plan participants that are on their employee benefits program? Videos also, so sharing videos if you have like an intranet or some way to disseminate that video to the employees, to have employees and their loved ones, again, kind of looking at home. Sometimes a video is more engaging than just a piece of paper with information on it. So looking for ways to make sure that you're aligning what is your culture and the way you communicate with your employees the best way, especially, in this situation. And then also social well-being. So for those extroverts that have been home for months now, like me, it's important to continue to address the social well-being. So, how can I continue to socialize in an environment where I have to also stay at home? So just giving you some tools and tips and tricks related to how do we kind of work through all of this. And we've heard it many times, we're all in this together. So making sure that we're just arming ourselves, as Madison said, managers, leaders, and our employees and their families with a lot of information or videos that they can kind of engage with and feel more comfortable that things for them will be good, and how to maintain their health and well-being. So with that, just want to say, if you have any questions that you're not comfortable asking in the chat box today, please reach out to us. Our information, I'll ask Madison just to kind of share it again so you'll have it. But reach out to us by phone, by email, or through the UT Business Center. So thank you again for your time today, and continue to stay well.
Thank you. And you did mention you were willing to share your presentation, and we can email that out to the people that had registered or that we can tell are online for this. Are you okay with that too, Rebecca? Sharing your presentation? Okay. So I do have one question. We used to host picnics and celebrations, and we've had to cancel all of those for the foreseeable future. Have you seen or heard or have any ideas of creative things to do in terms of benefits for morale boosters?
I'll take that one. I've seen a couple of things, I guess. I've seen just virtual, I mean, obviously virtual happy hours, everyone's kind of seen those now, but just virtual gatherings, virtual dance parties. I've also seen where kind of like a virtual lunch where everyone gets a Grubhub gift card or something like that, DoorDash, wherever, to support local businesses, and then kind of have a meal or a snack together or coffee. And so that's kind of a nice way to send something and get together virtually. What was also great too, we got in the mail a couple of weeks ago a awesome Hylant Yeti cup that said "Together Hylant Strong." So that was really, I don't know, that was for me, I loved that. I thought it was a really great gift. It reminded us, it would remind me always of this time together and how we pulled together as a company, and it's a Yeti, so it's awesome. So those are a couple of things that I have seen. Anyone else?
I would say
And
we
I
also, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Michelle.
Our manager also offered to support the community and buy local. He provided us with an opportunity to expense our a dinner one night for the family. So that was a way to reward not only the employee but also the family members. So certainly you could put a limit on that, and it might not work for everybody, but that was also a nice way to stay kind of connected and engaged, because some of the team members also kind of ate dinner together virtually. So just another thing.
Okay. Thanks. I put a message in the chat if anyone's doing anything. There's a few things there if you don't have your chat on. Scott, great, 6 disciplines. We've done a virtual Zoom Jeopardy game for the team. That actually sounds like a lot of fun. It took a little planning, but they have some tools. And I've heard that there are different softwares and websites that are doing this and making it a little bit easier for you to do. So if anyone knows of any or if you used anything specific, go ahead and throw it in the chat. Stephanie Johnston with Transcend Marketing. They delivered spring plants to each team member's house. Oh, that's really nice, to remind them that we can grow through this together. And folks are planting them in their yards and gardens. Chad Kripke's participated in a community event where dinner was delivered to people's homes. They ate together on Zoom. These are great ideas. It was surprisingly warm and inviting. So, really good. Yeah, keep those ideas coming. I'm taking notes. I mean, we might be doing some of this in our office. We did have another question. What do you do if you notice a difference and I assume as you're reopening and they're coming back in, if you notice a difference in employees' personalities? Is it something that you should address, or do you let them come to you, or how do you handle a situation like that?
Yeah, great question. I would say that definitely lean in. Don't assume that they don't want to talk about it. So again, I think that's kind of arming the managers. I know some companies now that are doing virtual trainings for managers as we're returning to work to kind of sharpen those skills of empathetic listening, asking good questions. Actually, I was going to share, and I didn't, but Chapman Institute has some really great examples of non-empathetic versus empathetic responses when an employee opens up. So even just as an example, not being dominating, but being understanding. What does that look like? So a non-empathetic response would be, this is just what you need to do, be a part of the solution, not the problem, just get on with it, get over it. Those are non-empathetic responses. Empathetic responses sound more like, so it sounds like you're saying this. What can I do to help? Now I want to make sure I understand, what does support look like here? And it may kind of, when I'm saying that, it might sound, well, yeah, I would never say that. But a lot of times in the moment, when emotions are high, things like that do come out. If we're not, practicing them and really thinking about them and kind of sharpening those tools. So I would definitely encourage you to train or remind your managers on how to lean in and have some of those conversations and kind of arm them with the tools, because just ignoring it is not going to make it go away. And even if the employee doesn't want to talk about it, at least you tried and you asked. Or maybe you could point them to a resource if they don't want to talk to you about it specifically, like the EAP. Is that helpful?
And also,
Yeah, I thought that was great.
Just to piggyback on what Madison said, keep in mind that anxiety, depression, those are also ADA, okay, considerations. And so, so you just want to be careful too that if your employee comes to you, and we've had a few of these where I don't want to wear a mask because of my social anxiety, and present you with a doctor's note, you're going to have to engage in the interactive process and accommodate. And so those are considerations. We see a lot of our employers saying, well, wait a minute, anxiety, it's anxiety, right? It's not a physical disability, but emotional conditions can be covered under the ADA. So just something else to keep in mind.
Okay. That's all the questions I had. Last chance if anyone wants to put something in the chat. Oh, yeah, someone asked if there will be slide downloads, and yet we will definitely get those out. We will, again, for the people that we know that has registered or that we can tell is online, that I don't know who iPad 3 is, but we will certainly email those out, and we can put them up on our website as well. There's a question. Our daughter works in design in San Francisco. She manages work between Hong Kong, San Francisco, and New York. She has found efficiency working across time zones, working around the clock while napping in between. She's far more efficient. How does she sell that homework is better? So I think the question is asking, again, she found out that she's more efficient working from home and maybe is getting called back into the office. So how does she go to her employer and say, and sell that to him that, no, I am more efficient working from home? So if anyone has any tips on that, or if anyone that's an employer wants to kind of pop on and say, this is what I would want to hear, or this is what would convince me. Any thoughts on that one?
Do you want to take that one, Rebecca? Okay,
what?
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Madison.
Well, I was going to ask if you wanted to take that one.
Yeah, I can take that. Okay, sorry.
You're good.
Yeah, I mean, the best thing an employee can do is to be, before going to his or her employer, is to make sure that she has everything in line ready to argue her case, okay? So it's something that if she feels like she's more efficient, get together the data showing that she's more efficient. If she's in sales or marketing, show that she's actually produced more during this time period than before, and have that frank conversation with her employer about why she believes that she's efficient and should be able to perform the job remotely. But the more data that she can bring to the table, in my opinion, I think the more persuasive that she will be able to be with her employer.
The other thing I would just add is that, I mean, we're talking about returning to the workplace, but we're not returning to the same world. I mean, whether we like it or not, things are different post-COVID. And that includes, maybe how employees want to do their job and, the virtual environment. And so that's just one example, but things are different. And so also as an employer, maybe thinking about, not going back to exactly how it was, how are we going to need to shift, because this world is different and there's different concerns and needs that employees have. And I think employers that are going to be able to be more open to that may find it easier to retain and attract employees in the future.
Those are great answers. A kind of a clarification question. Is it a requirement by the Ohio Department of Health to wear masks?
So it depends on the industry is the answer regarding that. So for example, like healthcare and medical care facilities. And so, for example, we just had a company who was in the construction business who said, we are requiring our employees to have masks on. And that was my example where one of the employees said, well, because of my medical condition, I can't wear a mask. And so there are various carve-outs in the governor's order that talk about situations under which an employee does not have to wear a mask. So if you look at the state of Ohio COVID website, it outlines those specific exceptions to wearing a mask. And again, I want to emphasize, if the employer is the one providing the mask and requiring it, there may be some OSHA compliance issues as well versus the employee bringing in their own mask. So keep that in mind. And one of the things too in the governor's order, I mean, it specifically talks about health conditions that render the employee either unable to wear a mask. So what I'm hearing a lot of is a lot of people will have anxiety or will hyperventilate if they have a mask. So there are certain exceptions under which masks may not need to be worn.
Okay. What if, so there's a comment in the comment section that I think this is kind of a very real thing to consider. Is a manufacturing facility where it already gets very hot in some of those environments. They're concerned about a hot summer and employee safety. And is there any specific type of documentation that they need in order to allow employees not to wear masks in the heat, if they're deemed especially a required industry, or even if they're not?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's going to be one of those questions that's going to be a case-by-case scenario. So it's not something that you can just generalize to all companies. It's going to be dependent on the industry. So nothing, and again, we're talking about May. The guidance is continually evolving. So the best thing that any employer can do is, when it comes July, see what the guidance says in July, what the governor's order says in July, because I will tell you, I mean, you click on, I could look at the CDC website from last week and there's a new order in place the following week. That's why those websites, CDC, OSHA, all of those, I mean, you should just have them on your save list and look at them repeatedly, because I don't candidly know what summer's going to look like and whether or not masks are going to be recommended or required in the summer. I'm guessing they will still be, but we don't know.
Well, that's all we had. Thank you so much to our presenters. It was very comprehensive, a lot of really good information. We appreciate all three of you being here today. Just a few things. I did mention that the presentations will be available. We've also recorded the session. It will be on our YouTube page, so we will email that link out. And we encourage you to share it with someone. Share it with someone who you think wasn't able to attend that might get some value out of this presentation. Kirsten in the chat box has listed links to all of our social media accounts, and we'd love for you to like us, follow us, link up with us. We are kind of a morale thing we're trying to do at the center is highlight one of our members daily and sponsors and talk about what they're doing. It's either in response to COVID or it's what they're doing to help out the community, and we've gotten a lot of positive reactions from that as well. We do have another webinar coming up this Thursday. That one will be at 8:30 a.m. And Shumaker and Kendrick is also facilitating that one for us and providing some great expertise on managing your contractual obligations during this time. A lot of things have changed from when you signed the contract. A lot of business assumptions have changed, and how do you address that? And then how do you incorporate what the future may bring into your current and future contracts from now? So we will, registration is on that event's on the website. Again, Kirsten has the link to there. You can click on that, register, and we'll send out the Zoom links for that as well. So that's all I got. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Angie. Thanks, Kirsten. Appreciate you.